With its many warehouses on the dikes, late 19th century Hamburg resembled a huge storage area, until the German Empire wanted to include the city in its customs territory. Otto von Bismarck urged Hamburg to join the German Customs Union. But a world harbor without a free port, how would that work? In 1881, the parties agreed on a compromise, with consequences. For customs, the city of Hamburg became inshore, but the harbor offshore. The 1,200 warehouses on the dikes became superfluous. Duty-free storage was over. As a replacement, the warehouse district was built. Since 2015, the warehouse district is a UNESCO cultural monument, the largest connected warehouse district in the world. Today, only carpets are stored here. There are museums, ad agencies, restaurants, publishers, and the Port Authority. For the first time in Hamburg's history, there is a division between city and harbor. Though it is the pride of Hamburg today, 20,000 people lost their homes and were never compensated for it. Millions of oak piles were driven into the Elbe sand. Construction only took 6 years. In 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm II formally dedicated the first segment of the district. Primarily colonial wares were stored here: coffee, spices, tea, and cocoa. This was possible because behind the bricks, storage conditions were perfect. The many people who were forced onto the streets to make room for the warehouses had to find new homes. They also wound up in the Gangeviertel.
Oh, this is terrible.
And it was her first child.
Poor guy.
It became even more crowded when the immigrants arrived.
This is it.
What? You mean we have to live in this shithole? No. I don't understand a word.
I'm sorry. Our journey was hard. There's nothing else. It's just for a short time.
They should be glad to have a roof over their heads at all.
Who knows? Maybe they were noblemen in Russia. A palace it is not.
Come on. What's the matter?
Come, we have nothing else. It's just for a short time.
Many immigrants came from Russia. Hamburg was a stepping stone to the New World.
The people simply ran away from hunger and from economic hopelessness. They hoped to build a modest new existence in North America. We can see a lot of parallels if we observe the experiences of many of today's refugees.
In the crowded inner city, tens of thousands waited to continue their journey, often for weeks. For millions of immigrants, Hamburg Harbor was the last stop in Europe. The crossing to New York took weeks, sometimes months. Most of the time, the people were jammed between decks. The trip was often horrible. The food was moldy. 1 in 5 died in steerage, of weakness or disease.
The name Between Decks was very fitting because it really was between the decks. It was a quick way to add more passengers.
Rebecca Geithner is an historian. She spent many hours in a replica of steerage at the Emigration Museum.
Originally, wares were transported from the USA to Europe. Then they realized these immigrants represented a large capital, very profitable. So they quickly built these between decks, cages really, hammered together carelessly. They were extremely simple. But as shipping companies began to compete more fiercely with one another for the immigrants' favor, the immigrants' demands on the shipping companies began to increase.
83 marks for a crossing. Cheaper than Lloyd's. Who needs a ticket? Only 83 marks.
Albert Ballin was also keen to get the emigrants' attention. He made himself a career as an agent for them and was a clever businessman.
It's the cheapest way to get to Dreamland.
We've been here for weeks. There's no more money.
Only 83 marks. It's the cheapest trip across the pond. I'll show you around, help you, tell you when and where to be, and even take you to the quay.
83 marks, there's 4 of us. That's 332 marks for all of us.
Let's do it. I can't stand this anymore. 100, 200, 300. Haggle.
300?
No, 332. 83 ahead, non-negotiable. Yes or no? The ship leaves in 5 days. I'll pick you up here at sunrise. The worst is behind you.
Albert Ballin only had a small immigration agency, but he was so successful and sold tickets to so many immigrants that it drew the attention of Hapag, Hamburg's biggest ship owner. What do you do with a competitor? You buy his company. You also take over his ideas. Ballin made Hapag the world's biggest ship owner.
He used fast steamers for emigration and had other plans at Hapag.
You really don't want some whiskey?
No, thank you. You're making plans again. I like that.
Exactly. I want you to build us the fastest steamship ever, and above all, the biggest ship in the German Empire. Luxurious and elegant.
For the immigrants?
No.
$150 meters long, 20 knots. That means a crew of at least 250 men. That'll be expensive.
Yes, I know. And we'll add 250 passengers. People with money. I want to sell pleasure trips, cruises. And you, Herman, will build my first ship. 4 weeks on the Mediterranean. Gibraltar, Jaffa, Constantinople, maybe the West Indies, or Spitsbergen. I promise you, pleasure trips are the future of shipping. To the future.
Ballin carried out his plans quickly. Soon, in addition to luxury liners, the first cruise ships were built. They conquered the world. The destinations were exotic, from the Levant to the far north. Around the turn of the century, Ballin's luxury trips started a new, lucrative line of business. And Hamburg Harbor became a hotspot for cruises. Today, over 500,000 people sail from Hamburg on cruises every year. More than ever, pleasure trips were a huge success for the ship owners. The shipyards also benefited from this. At Blohm and Foss's dry dock, workers overhaul the luxury liners. This still guarantees about 1,000 jobs. In Wallenstein, there are more than 20,000 of them. In the late 19th century, the shipyards started building iron ships. Other crafts were in demand. The carpenters who built wooden ships made way for iron workers. Within a few years, Hamburg Harbor became the world's main shipbuilder. But then the harbor received another blow. In 1892, cholera broke out in Hamburg. Almost 10,000 people died. Dock workers were tasked with disinfecting the poor quarters, and a young doctor arrived in Hamburg from Berlin.
Look closely. It's a tragedy. Unworthy of a European city.
If you don't wash, it's your own fault. Revolting.
Hamburg's waste ends up in the Elbe. The drinking water is from the Elbe. It's about the water supply. The filtration system you have already planned must finally be built. You have to do this and do it quickly.
We don't have to do anything. The immigrants bring this mess with them.
I'm a doctor. I know what I'm saying. The water spreads cholera, and it'll keep coming back unless the city acts. Hamburg's drowning in trash and feces.
Come on, you're exaggerating.
Ugh. Gentlemen, please. If you love your city, I would advise you to act quickly.
Dr. Bernhard Nocht convinced the authorities. Wells were built. The Gangeviertel water was cleaned. Soon, the cholera was under control. But Nocht stayed in Hamburg. New tasks awaited him. The harbor was a gateway for the world's diseases.